This week, we welcome radio host and physician Dr. Drew Pinsky. What were the questions that struck you the most in the early days?
The magnitude, and I'm going to use a word that has a kind of pejorative quality, and I don't mean it pejoratively, but the ignorance around human biology and reproductive health and STIs and where babies come from. I mean, it was birth control and how that worked. It was astonishing. One of the very problematic aspects of the sexual revolution is the adults who carried this thing out never thought about what it would do to adolescents.
Right.
In fact, they assumed adolescents would, of course, not have sex. They would know better. Well, I had just been an adolescent. I knew what was going on. I was like, are you kidding me? The adolescents picked up your sexual revolution and, of course, went further than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
We were in it. And so no information, no planning for that. No, what are you going to do about this? I mean, what goes on here?
This is Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you are welcome. You know the drill. Please subscribe, rate, comment, share, reach out, tell your friends, send smoke signals, whatever. We love your feedback and we want to hear from you. If you like our work and want to support us, the best way to do that is join Phetasy.com. You'll get access to behind-the-scenes content, outtakes, discounts on merch, and the ability to submit questions for some of our upcoming guests. Support your favorite scrappy little internet heroes at Phetasy.com. I'm with Dr. Drew, everybody. Welcome to Walk-Ins Welcome. Do I need to give your whole name? I feel like everyone knows who Dr. Drew
Whatever.
is.
I hope they know. I don't like intros because I feel like if people come to hear our conversation, they kind of know who they're coming to hear.
They better.
Yeah.
I still like to do it just to honor my guest. It is an honor to have you on because it's some, as we mentioned on the podcast that we just did, which everyone should go listen to. I was on Dr. Drew's show. You were the voice in my head kind of growing up as I listened to Loveline obsessively when I was in my preteens and teen years.
So what years were those really? Calendar years.
So when did you guys start? 92?
83.
83.
Before you were born.
No, I'm 78. I'm an old.
Before you could walk and talk very much.
No, I was walking and talking at 5, I hope. I think 92 was when 91, 92. That was when my parents were splitting up. That's when I was really listening to that's when I found you guys.
Well, people don't appreciate today, young people, how powerful radio was.
Radio was the best.
Yeah, it was it was how you identified yourself by which radio station you listened to. And you'd go to their events and you'd know their air staff and you'd call in with things. It was a community. And it just doesn't exist like that anymore.
Yes, I think that it was the years from 91 and I was in Connecticut at that time, and then to 97, 98 around
91 we had not yet syndicated that far.
Was it 92?
Well, we were in all up and down California around then, but we didn't go far and wide until like 95, 96.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
Maybe you caught
I was exposed to you.
Isn't that weird? And then MTV hit 97. We were on TV.
Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was later than I remember. It feels like I was 90. Where was I in 95? I don't even know where I was in 95. In 93 or 4, I moved to Minnesota. But I know I listened to you on the radio.
We could. It's Minnesota may have been Minneapolis may have been one of our early affiliates.
Were you guys in New York?
Not so much later.
No.
98. Yeah.
Interesting.
7. Weird.
Maybe it was later.
Yeah.
I feel I could
be getting the dates wrong too. Let's be fair.
I have not a great recollection of all of that time because we moved so much, but I do know that it was around my early, so 95, I would have been around. I was so lost at that time in my life, basically, that I would cling to any anyone who had any kind of valuable information. And I loved your dynamic because it was, comedy and information. That's like my favorite
Adam,
thing.
then.
Mm-hmm.
Adam and I, yeah.
Yep.
Adam actually came in 96. That's when
96. Yeah, but
95.
I listened to, okay.
It was Ricky Rackman until 95. From 90 to 95.
But I would listen to you before Adam came.
Okay. So maybe Ricky and I.
So maybe it was 95, right? When I caught you, and then Adam came.
Yep. Interesting. Well, it was, a piece of radio history, and we think we affected a lot of people. It's certainly what I would have wanted when I was that age. That was the naive notion I started with.
How did you get into it?
So it's a long story. Essentially, the sort of shark notes are that I was living in Pasadena, going to medical school. At the time in Los Angeles, there were essentially two dominant radio stations, KLOS and KMET, and you defined yourself by which station you listened to. Like, the radio was a huge influence back then, but it was really starting to bore me. And I kept hearing about this other station. There's something called K-Rock, and K-Rock came out of nowhere and became within a year became the number one station in the number one radio market in the country. It was this huge phenomenon called rock of the 80s. It was new wave music. Remember that? And and I lived across the street from the radio station. I just happened to be living there while I was in medical school. And so friends of mine were socializing with people at that radio station, and they two guys, Poor Man at Swedish Eagle, decided they wanted to throw the phone lines open and be friends and give friendly advice about relationships to their listeners. And the program director said, okay, you can have Sunday night, midnight to Monday morning, 3 a.m. and make it, we need a community service show. We don't have a community service show required by the FCC. So make it community service. And they didn't know how to do that. And somebody said, well, Pinsky's in medical school. Maybe he can come in and he'll use big words and people will think that's public service. And I was like, it was sort of took some convincing to get me up there. And I went up there with my textbooks from gynecology and infectious disease. And I was just blown away. The moment I went up there, I was just absolutely blown away that this is where young people were coming for health information. And never heard of AIDS. So we just were starting to call GRIDS AIDS. We used to call it gay-related intestinal disease syndrome, and now we just were calling it AIDS. We just had a causative agent called HTLV3 at the time. We didn't have the HIV sort of moniker yet. And I just thought I got to keep doing this. And so I would just come back. They said, yeah, come back, answer questions, And so I'd sort of stand in the hall and answer questions. And for like an hour, I'd go from like midnight to 1 or 1:30 or something. It's kind of interesting. And all of a sudden one night they sat me down at the table, and all of a sudden I'm co-hosting this thing. And I just stayed there and did it one night a week. It quickly moved then to 10 to 1. It went from 12 to 3 to 10 to 1. Once I got involved, and I did it for 10 years for free. I thought I was doing community service.
Wow.
And I thought it was interesting and fun. I met interesting people. I met my wife through this organization. She was there, working. And so it was just a thing. And if I was on call, I just didn't go. And then all of a sudden it took over my life.
Wow.
Well, the way that worked was they pay the station, because there weren't Sunday night ratings. They had to purchase a special ratings book to see what was going on. And they did so and discovered that 1 in every 3 radios in Los Angeles was tuned to this show on Sunday night.
Wow.
That was historically significant. And the program director said, I'm going to put it on 5 nights a week. I'm going to put this on 5 nights a week. And that's what 5 nights a week came. And at that exact time, my wife got pregnant with triplets. And she said, hey, no more community service. You're walking out here every night. You're getting paid for that. That's a job. And I went, all right. I sort of went in hat in hand. Could I please have, get paid for this time spent? And that's sort of how it started.
Wow. What were the questions that struck you the most in the early days?
The magnitude, and I'm going to use a word that has a kind of pejorative quality, and I don't mean it pejoratively, but the ignorance around human biology and reproductive health and STIs and where babies come from. I mean, it was birth control and how that worked. It was astonishing. And again, then the idea, you got to remember at that point, I know you and I talked a little about the sexual revolution. One of the very problematic aspects of the sexual revolution is the adults who carried this thing out never thought about what it would do to adolescents. In
Right.
fact, they assumed adolescents would, of course, not have sex. They would know better. Well, I had just been an adolescent. I knew what was going on. I was like, are you kidding me? The adolescents picked up your sexual revolution and, of course, went further than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
We were in it. And so no information, no planning for that. No, what are you going to do about this? I mean, what goes on here? It was all, condoms were behind the counter. You'd have to line up with the older women collecting their hormone replacement therapies and ask the pharmacist to bring the condoms out from behind the counter.
Oh gosh.
My God. And that was one of the things I railed against early. Just, one thing after another, they didn't understand. And by the way, the term for STIs at that day, when we were, early 80s, they were still being called venereal diseases.
I know.
Venereal diseases. This is a weird Latin term.
VDs.
Yeast infections were called moniliasis. It's gonococcal infections. We just had all this weird shrouded language we put over it. And I thought, this is all easy. It's easy infectious disease stuff. We've got antibiotics for everything. People can understand this and how it's transmitted. Just tell them. And that was sort of what was going on at the beginning. And then as we went along, we started, the people's sophistication came along. And then we started dealing more with the drugs and alcohol. And interesting, at the same time, I tend to gravitate to whatever is sort of the problem of the day. And so I started working in a drug treatment center. I ended up running a drug treatment center for many years. And so my expertise sort of came along in that area and was quite useful in Loveline, because we were now talking about drug addiction all the time. And then, of course, a word that you don't particularly like, but was barely in use at the time, or people barely knew what it meant. Trauma was one of the most significant inciting influences of addiction. And certainly sexual trauma was alive and well, because that's the other thing the sexual revolution did. It said the kids are just little adults, and they're into sex just like the women and just like the men, just whatever. And so they were acted out upon like horribly. And so we were dealing with that. So
as somebody who's seen all of these very important things evolve, do you feel like people are more educated than they were about biology, about infectious diseases? How do you feel about the sexual revolution? How do you feel about addiction? What have you seen throughout your career? What's the trend that you've noticed?
I'm not sure I can answer that all in one swoop. But
it's like a book, really. I need you to write another book.
All right, I'll write that. So what I was going to say is that for sure people are far less ignorant. And again, that seems like such a harsh term, but they are far less so. And they have access, of course, to information right, in their hand with their screen. And yet still people are as confused as ever.
Yeah.
So I do a show called Dr. Drew After Dark, where we're answering the same old questions. It has a little different sort of quality to it, because they kind of know the landscape a little better, but they still are as confused as ever. And they still are as uncertain as ever. And they still don't know who to trust and where to get solid information. And it's not surprising to me, because there is a huge difference between information and knowledge. And then above that, wisdom. So you can understand, what the gonorrhea bacteria does and where it comes from and what its symptomatology is. But, first of all, you can't really judge yourself very well, because, that's why doctors don't treat themselves. You have to have somebody objectively assessing you. You have to have somebody who's had experience with these things. You know what to worry about, what not to worry about. So those kinds of questions, they're sort of, let's call them more second order these days, but there's still lots of confusion. So it was what I was saying back in the HIV days too. I kept saying this. It's what Loveline modeled, frankly, which was you can't have a doctor in a white coat giving information that does not change health behaviors. But if they hear a case and they hear somebody like them talking about the case, and then I'm explicating it, they get that, they hear that, they learn from that. That experiential kind of learning is much more powerful.
That it's very, very similar to how people in recovery get well in
100%.
many ways.
100%. It's sitting across from another person,
Yep. And
and listening to stories in the room.
mhm. And you mentioned in our podcast that we did on your show that you got into addiction because it's something where someone goes from being nearly dead to thriving, not that very rare.
Like
Yes.
amazing, like miracles happen. Yeah,
and
that was incredible.
and what are you seeing in that? I mean, there's so much science now around addiction, and there's what have you learned about addiction over the course of your career?
So I'm going to table the big question you asked me about what have I seen, what's sort of the sweep of what I've seen, because I that was the hard question you asked me that I didn't answer.
Hmm.
So we'll
We'll
come
get
back
back
to
to
that.
it.
Okay. The science has been refined, but it's been worked out for quite some time. And I have lived through multiple fads, including the opioid epidemic, which I railed against that. I fought that so hard. And much like COVID, there was silencing of people that raised their voices because they were dinosaurs and interested in hurting people and human suffering. And these people were going to rescue humans from ever experiencing pain. I was like, no, no, you are killing people.
Yeah.
This is insane. So I've seen many fads and many treatment ideas come and go. And so I'm terribly concerned about things that are sort of new and, the answer. 12 steps have been around for nearly 100 years. There's now a Cochrane analysis that shows it is evidence-based, works as well as anything else or better when abstinence is your goal. And it's free and it's available all the time. You can't argue about that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
there are other things we do now that are helpful. Cognitive behavioral therapy has turned out to be helpful. There are medication assistances that people over rely on, both the doctors and the patients. They expect it to fix their addiction, which it never will. But they can be useful, done carefully and sparingly. But the pharmacology side has gotten more complicated and more crowded, I would say. And unfortunately, there are people in my profession that believe that they're fixing and treating addiction with those chemicals, which they are not. They are at most making recovery possible. They're decreasing some of the drives and desperation and that kind of thing. But there's still so much potential to harm with the medication. So much.
I saw an article the other day. I didn't read the whole thing, but it was about how they're seeing Ozempic now is giving people, they're like, oh, I stopped wanting to shop online and it's stopping kind of all addictive behaviors across the board. They're seeing evidence that it's helping people quit, not just helping with weight loss but I think it's a diabetes drug. I don't know.
It's a diabetes drug. I will be surprised if that holds.
Yeah.
I think it's just making people kind of run down and they don't want to do a lot of things. So we'll see. The ghrelin system, the leptins and the things that determine appetite, of course, ultimately stimulate those same regions of the brain, right, that are associated with essentially addiction is a disorder of the part of the brain that says, do that again.
Right.
Okay. People talk about, and this is a complete misrepresentation of reality. They go, you need that dopamine hit. Here's what happens when you get a dopamine hit. You feel nothing except the desire to do that again. Cocaine is a perfect example of the drive system aspect of addiction. You get more miserable with each hit. You get psychotic within a couple of days, and you know that's coming. You are not feeling good. You're feeling worse with each hit, and yet you do that again. That's dopamine. The opioid system, the endorphin system, the feel-good system, the liking system rather than the wanting system, that is the endorphin system, the endocannabinoid system. That's a wholly different operation. It's not dopamine.
Do you see trends in drugs with the culture? As you've
Sure.
It seems like a very opioid culture right now. Cannabinoid, like that.
Cannabinoid, and you're right. The cannabinoids have an opioid effect at these high doses and high concentrations. Obviously, the pill thing was out of control, and a lot of the heroin addicts are leftover pill addicts. and now fentanyl has kicked in where that is left off. But there's,
but the 80s were very like the liking. It feels like the 80s were and the late 70s were the liking, the dopamine generations. And now
the wanting, because you're liking a lot and then wanting even when you don't like. That's
right. Wanting. And then this feels more like
benzodiazepines are still alive and well. So I would argue that, the benzos, the opiates are sort of the hazy ones,
right.
Turn me off,
numb me,
shut me down. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I would love to see some kind of analysis of what's going on. It's like the pendulum swinging, but also the drugs are swinging with it.
Well, let's think about it. In the 70s and particularly in the 80s, there was fun.
Right.
Major thing. Everyone engaged in it. Everyone looked for it. And I don't think there's any freaking fun anymore. It just doesn't seem like anything's fun. Right.
That's the thing that's really unsettling to me, is the cynical nature of entire generations. And I was going to ask you, as somebody who studies addiction, what are your thoughts on social media?
Oh, bad. Yeah, screen addiction, definitely. I mean, screens we will look at like tobacco soon enough. No doubt in my mind. And it particularly is problematic for developing brains, particularly. And it has many, many, many layers to it. The most obvious on the addictive front is pornography. And it's just so powerful and so intense and so carefully crafted and stuff to, keep you locked in there. That, of course, that's a big part of it. But there's shopping and there's gambling and there's then the social part and comparison and dating. It's just everything is in there that can get out of control, with our behaviors.
Do you see upsides to it at all?
Well, sure, like everything, right? Everything, not everything is pure. Even mental illness isn't pure down, right?
Right.
People like I have anxiety and obsessive compulsive kinds of stuff, and made me a great student because I'd worry about everything. I'd double check, I'd triple check, and I'd compulsively do everything. And so that's something that's beneficial from it. That's not all pejorative, not all negative. Until I started having panic attacks and my depressions got out of control. Then it was great. And that wasn't so good anymore. But I'm sure, the information and the communication and all these things, the efficiencies that it adds, if we can just get people to use it less and to not use it when they're young and to, figure out how, like alcohol, or anything else that, people can moderate. Not everybody can. Some people can't and need to swear off it.
It's fascinating. I have a 13-month-old and it gravitates to that Black Mirror like a moth to a flame. And it's also just the genius in particular of iPhones. They are made, it's like they said, how would a child use this? And that's how we're going to design it, because it's so intuitive for kids to swipe. She didn't learn that. It's just something she started doing when she picked. It's wild. My husband and I are like, oh my God, how are we going to manage this? Because she's already so. Oh, and I work from home. I have my own business. I've got to be mindful of how much mommy's looking at the phone, because she's going to learn that. But we're outside and doing things and she's not, and it's still, she sees that thing and she's like, it makes a beeline for it. There's just something about the design of these devices that children are attracted to.
And speaking about, the stuff that they get exposed to, the average age of porn exposure now, I think, is 9.
Oh, that's crazy.
And we have no idea what that does to a developing brain.
And it's so hard, even if you keep your own children off of screens or you're regulating it. They go out in the neighborhood, they're playing with their friends. They come back and they're like, look what my friend saw on TikTok, or I saw a dead cat hanging on TikTok, and they're all distraught.
100%. There's some people that theorize some of the gender stuff is coming off of porn exposure. It's like, what is that? Oh, I must not be a woman, or I must not be a man. It's like, that's not me. I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I can understand a lot of the resistance to, the numbers of, they're saying the kids just aren't having sex anymore, really, like they were. And I would posit some of that is being replaced by screen addiction and porn.
Yeah.
And I can understand why people would see that, women in particular, but men too, sensitive young men are like, yeah, no thanks. That's not for me. Because it's not representative at all. That's the thing about porn.
Right. Or they see something that's just traumatic.
Right.
It just goes a little too far. Because the stuff's kind of designed for the male brain, but even what happens is people get sort of numb to what they're looking at. They go for more and more intense stuff.
I have a stand-up routine about this too, because I had a brief moment where I got addicted to porn. It happened so fast. And then I joke about how it started with like hentai. I was watching just some cartoons.
Yeah.
And then it was like I kept needing more. And there was a really disturbing video that I saw where a woman was crying and she was talking about how it was her first time getting anal. And I was like, yeah, right. And then she started crying and I was like, oh shit, maybe it was her first time. But then in my stand-up, I'm like, tears? Now I need tears?
What about what comes after that?
Yeah, I don't want to know what I need to stop. And it was seeing, this was in sobriety, early sobriety.
So that's really interesting, right? And so your brain automatically tries to push you into something, massage that part of the brain, which porn, gambling, all that stuff will do it. It's very common for behavioral addictions to kick in first couple of years of sobriety.
Behavioral addictions are gnarly. They're at least with a substance, you can put it down. This is why people with eating disorders, I worked with young girls and almost all of them in LA had eating disorders and they were teenagers, and that eating disorders are just so impossibly hard to treat because you can't not eat. Yeah. At least with drinking and drugs, I could just not do that. But I mean, gambling, people do not understand what a gnarly addiction gambling is.
Yeah. And there's different versions too. There's different qualities to it, like every addiction. There's people that aim to lose. They don't feel alive unless their back's against the wall and they're in debt. And there are people that just win and can't get over winning and just have to get that back again. There are people that dissociate and sit at the slot machines. And sometimes those people actually have to wear diapers when they go to the casino.
Oh, wow.
They dissociate so completely. So there's differing, and it's profound. It's intense.
Yeah, I think behavioral addictions, people really don't understand. A lot of lip service is given to like opioids and fentanyl, and I don't feel like people understand how destructive like porn addiction.
Yeah,
it can destroy your whole life.
Into sex and then prostitutes, and here it goes, and it just keeps going. It just keeps progressing. Addiction is a progressive illness. Period. It progresses. It doesn't stay the same. Things get more and more intense with time. Was it when you came off the opiates?
Yeah. Well, no, this was when I got sober at 35.
For real sobriety.
And for real sobriety.
So your brain was just going, I need something. Do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do this. We're not gonna let you get. We're gonna.
I missed a friend's birthday party, and I was like, oh shit! This is a sign of addiction.
You're sitting there looking at hentai porn.
Yeah. It was short lived, but it was long enough that I was like, whoa! I can see how it. And it was around exactly when I started writing for Playboy. And it was, I can see, I was getting so many emails from men when I started writing for Playboy because I would just ask questions and have people submit. And so many men were struggling with porn addiction. Many.
Yeah, it's very common. And what I'm starting to hear about now outside of addiction, because the males they're so freaked out. They don't want to be hated on. They don't want to be seen as aggressive. They don't want to be seen as predatory. They've missed the usual developmental sort of milestones when they should be developing skills for socializing and dating. They just didn't do any of that because it was all the Me Too time, and they just sort of pulled out. They just stayed out and stayed with their porn. They were fine. They got their porn. Okay, good. I got this. And they just don't know how to have relationships and get back into it. They just don't know. And now I'm starting to see them go to prostitutes. That's what's starting to happen now.
I mean, you have this kind of yin and yang with like the webcam. You don't even have to go directly to prostitutes. You can do cam girls or go to OnlyFans or have a kind of simulation relationship where it's not, but it's like a facsimile of what one might be if you're incapable of having an actual relationship. I wanted to know what your thoughts are on, this is just something I always think about with addiction. and maybe you know some science behind this, what is the human propensity to self-destruct? It seems to go so against.
Yeah.
Like, I always joke that my suicide note would be "fuck you, Darwin."
That's good. So there's many different sort of aspects to this, right? One is there is Freud actually theorized that there was like a death impulse. And I have noticed that amongst addicts and alcoholics, doing very dangerous things gets them high. And so they do that and they die sometimes doing that. So there's that. And I don't really think they have any intentions of dying. They just get high off of the situation, right?
Right.
So they literally get the same rush that the heroin gives them.
Yep.
So there's that. Then humans have this very bizarre quality, this particular mechanism that when they've had shattering experiences in childhood, certainly under the age of 12, generally under the age of 8, when things were overwhelming and the sense in the child's mind was that they were going to cease to exist, and that shatters the child's regulatory system, and it wires in a couple of mechanisms, one of it which is something called traumatic reenactment. And people don't think about this very often, but if you've been had a traumatizing relationship or traumatizing situation, for some reason that wires in an attraction, literally like a desire to be with or around the people and circumstances that are identical to those situations that were so highly traumatizing. You'd think we'd have the opposite, right? We'd be aversive to those things, but no, we're attracted to them. If your dad was an alcoholic who never, who abandoned you when you were 3, magically you're going to find those guys very extremely attractive. And of course, they will oblige you by doing the same thing all over again. So humans get into these reenactments. And I have noticed even when people have near-death experiences, sometimes they'll go do a near-death reenactment afterwards.
Wow.
They're like, I'm trying to master this thing, and I'm gonna go back and face my fears, and they almost die a second time. It's like, no, don't give in to that. That's a bad impulse. It's one thing to face your fears in some kind of controlled ways, but don't recreate the situation that was so dangerous in the first place. So there's probably several different mechanisms at foot here. From the addict side, I understand that from an evolutionary perspective, because addicts are great survivors and they get high in situations when the rest of us get terrified. And so if a bunch of Huns came over the hill here in armor, the addicts would do much better than I would. I would fool around and ask my patients, when I give lectures every week to these rooms, I go, how about if a bunch of Huns came over the hill? What would you guys do? And they're all like, I'd go fight. I'm like, oh, well, that's not a normie react. Normies would turn the other way and evidently get a spear in the back. So your survival is higher. And by the way, addicts in these extreme situations, their anxiety goes away, time slows down.
I was going to say, I get so calm in chaotic situations. Yep. My cousin always laughs. She's like, everyone will be running around and there'll be Bridget in the middle with like holding the old lady's head who collapsed in the middle of the movie theater. But everything slows down and it becomes very clear what needs to happen.
It's why they make great shortstops, fighter pilots, extreme athletes. The addicts are great at all that stuff.
Interesting.
So that has an evolutionary advantage to it. You can see it pretty clearly. Why we would have traumatic reenactments from things that, if we learned in childhood, should teach us the opposite does not quite make sense to me. I wonder if it's something more like adaptive for the group or the community. Sometimes humans do things that the group learns from. Like if the group sees you doing these stupid things over and over, they learn, okay, not me. I'm not going to do that.
That's really interesting, because the woo would be like, oh, you just attract it until you heal it, basically.
No, it doesn't. This idea of mastery over the original trauma is bullshit.
Yeah. And it's not that to go back to you saying I hate the word trauma. I don't hate the word. I just feel like it's massively overused. Everything is, traumatic now. Yep. So it loses its gravity.
Yep. I agree.
But yeah, that's interesting, because I think a lot about this stuff, and particularly when it comes to depression and suicide. And it just seems so against the survival instinct that we have as animals.
Yeah, it is weird.
Is there a history of suicide? Has anyone written this book and I just don't know about it?
I bet it's out there. I know there are lots of theoreticians on suicide in terms of, how much of it is a spiritual malady, how much of it is a genetic thing. There's clearly a genetic component to it too. How much of it is adaptive in the sense of grief and grief reactions, and because a lot of suicidality has sort of at its core is kind of a grief thing, the intensity of grief. So I don't know. I don't know if anybody's written a sort of I'm sure be interesting to, well, what's his name? Famous sociologist. What's a famous Hungarian sociologist? I think he wrote about, I know he wrote about suicide. So there's people that have theorized.
It seems so rampant now. And, for all of the lip service that we give mental health and mental illness, it feels like everyone's getting crazier. So this is something that I would love your thoughts on why it seems like with all of the information we have about mental health and mental illness, everyone seems to be getting worse.
Well, it's back to something we were talking about a while ago, is that information is not treatment. It's not. How about if I taught you everything you needed to know about addiction?
Yeah.
Right? You have to experience these things, and you have to experience it with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that the biggest reason we're in trouble right now is we're so cut off from each other. And the whole social isolation of COVID was immensely harmful, and predictably so. Predictably. It was just such a horrible. Every night our mayor would come out and go, shelter in place. I had a news show. I had a local news broadcast I was doing then to sort of update people on what was going on. And every night I go, would you shut up? You stop saying those words. You are hurting people.
Yeah.
You're hurting 10-year-olds. It scares the shit out of them. And they believe that if they go outside, they're going to kill their parents. Stop it. Stop saying it.
I raged against this. I was raging online because I felt like my friend Carol Markowitz calls them the laptop class. It felt like they were protecting themselves, but I knew so many people, when everybody was opening up and they're like, I'm over COVID, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, people have been working this whole time. When you shut down schools, who do you think this hurts? It doesn't hurt the kids with yards and screens getting tutored. It hurts the kids when you shut down playgrounds. This isn't hurting the rich kids who have backyards. It's hurting kids who you ostensibly care about, who are quote unquote marginalized. They're the ones who are going to fall off the grid. They're going to lose. Some of them will never go back to school. Some of them never learn. It's like those costs.
It's so predictable. And you care so much. You care so much, and yet you do this. Okay. All right.
I don't get it.
Again, the same news broadcast, different night, I was arguing with, I was sort of railing on one of the I think she was LA Unified School District secretary, and she goes, "We need masks, and we're going to need gloves, and we're going to need plastic barriers." And I go, okay, whatever you need. Let's not argue about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. Do it. How long is it going to take? How many days? How many days do we get the kids back to school? She called me a racist. And I was like, no, you got to get the kids back to school. So how many days? Let's just do this thing you want. Let's do it. How much is it going to cost? We can go beat on the school board then for doing it. Let's go do it. No, you're a sexist and a racist.
It's such an easy catch-all to just not have to take any responsibility or answer any questions.
It's unbelievable. So it is not Carl, his name is Durkheim. And he wrote a book on suicide, I think at the end of the 19th century. And he had different kinds of suicide: egotistic suicide, anomic suicide.
Oh, interesting.
Fatalistic suicide. I remember hearing about this stuff and thinking, this is all sort of bullshit. But he did do an analysis at one time. And I'm sure
were they killing themselves back in ancient Greece? Somebody that I was talking to about this on the podcast said a lot of suicide back then was more about honor. It wasn't like, I'm sad,
I'm depressed. Yeah, and some of it may be, human behaviors may manifest to help population problems too. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Food resources or something. Who knows what
So
effect?
that's why we're not having sex and killing ourselves.
Evidently. Jeez. Oh man.
I really like you because we can laugh about the dark things.
Yeah, I know. Like I said, I told you on my program, I love working with addicts because they're so funny. And the darker stuff helps. First of all, it's relieved by the funny, and the funny is funnier in juxtaposition with the dark.
Oh, I mean, some of the best jokes and best humor in rehabs and 12-step and in the darkest places, because only there can you go like, oh, I know exactly which tree I'm going to run into.
Yes.
And everyone will laugh. They won't be like, oh no, are you okay? They'll be like, ha ha ha.
Yes.
You're an addict.
Some of this woke stuff makes you feel uncomfortable laughing at anything.
Yeah.
You have to laugh at stuff. My God.
No, that war on like humor is so, that's what I mean when I say there are certain aspects of whatever's going on in our culture right now that feel sinister. And one of them is the attack on comedy and comedians. It's just, it's
gotten
so
better. I feel like Dave Chappelle broke it open. I feel like Chappelle, no, I'm not kidding. I feel like Chappelle did America and comedians a favor by breaking it out a little bit.
Yeah. You mentioned that you had OCD and then anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
When was this? And
so obviously always these are chronic conditions, right?
From when you were a kid?
So I had depression from like the age of 9 to 19. I had an abusive mom and sort of a traumatizing dad who lived through the Holodomor and depression and stuff. And so that all rained down on me. And I'm not saying I was depressed the entire time, but the general tone was depressive.
Did you know it or was it okay?
No idea.
Yeah.
I started having panic attacks when I was 19. And they were disabling panic attacks. Like I really, oh boy. And that's when I first sort of went to treatment, and the treatment was kind of shitty, but I got better and I made a lot of changes in my life and going to medical school, and everything was fine after that. I mean, and I've always had sort of, obsessive compulsive kinds of minor stuff, just ritual, not stepping on cracks, like sidewalks, stuff like that, stupid stuff. And that all became an asset during, really when I had to academically really get my shit together. I mean, my anxiety about it, I made sure I studied enough, and I would double check and triple check, go after everything. And it was very, especially as a physician, it's very, very useful to be worrying about your patients and to be obsessive about checking and double checking and triple checking. That is how you want your doctors to be, believe me.
Yes.
But back when I was 19, I also was depressed. I didn't realize it, but the depression, as the panic kind of settled down, the depression became rather severe. I would say severe. And in retrospect, I would argue that I'm prone to depression. I have to be like really, I have to be busy and into things and excited about stuff, or I tend to sink. So I still kind of have that I'm actually concerned a little bit about it, because it you can only stay that kind of active for so long.
Yeah, that's
you worry.
I really identify with a lot of that. I had bad anxiety, debilitating panic attacks when I quit drinking and smoking weed, and a lot of that anxiety, I think, went away. But then I had bad depression in my early sobriety that I always just thought I was hungover. I'm like, oh, I might have been depressed.
You're mourning the loss of alcohol, which people do. They go through a whole.
I think that too, but I think I wrestle too with that. If I can get on the bike and be active, but the minute I have an injury and I'm forced to kind of sit still, I really have to look that black dog in the face and say, oh, you're still kind of skulking around.
So I went into treatment. One of my kids needed brain surgery when he was 1, and my anxiety went berserk again. And my wife called me one day when my workaholism, can be a terrible workaholic. Like I can work 16, 18-hour days for weeks on end and no problem. I mean, just ridiculous hours and intensity. And now I don't think I could, or certainly I don't want to, but still everything seems like I'm not working compared to how I was then. and so she called me one day at work. She goes, "You need to see a therapist." And I go, because I'd been sort of thinking about it. I'm working in mental health. I need to clear my own shit up. I got to see a therapist. And I go, yeah, I've been thinking about that. And she goes, "No, you need to see someone. And the hair stood up in the back of my neck. I thought, oh, just the way she said it, I thought, oh, okay, message received. Put the phone down, called for referral, made an appointment that minute, and stayed in therapy for 11 years.
Wow.
It was the most productive thing I've ever done. So I had a lot of trauma and stuff, like I said, and because I was busy with these narcissistic, traumatizing parents, a lot of my emotional systems were disconnected. I wasn't well connected to my feelings. And so I had to get that hooked back up again so I could have spontaneous primary emotions again and name them and understand them and regulate them. And that took time. That took time.
Wow. I still feel that distance
From your feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great time for therapy. Just go.
I'm in therapy.
Okay. I mean,
but
I would go to the therapist's office every day and I have to sit down and concentrate and go, I am feeling whatever it was, I'd have to follow it. But
yeah,
it's not a normal sort of thing for my brain to do, my body.
Yeah, no, I have to do that. But even from my loved ones and joy and intimacy, I feel like that's where I feel it the most, is I feel that distance because I'm afraid I'll lose them or they'll go away or whatever. But that's where I really still perceive it, even after so much therapy.
So has it been with the same therapist or different ones?
It's been with the same one for the past 7 years now.
Okay. Do you, male or female?
Female.
Do you feel like, for some reason that sounds right to me for you, do you feel like the level of intimacy you achieve with her is comfortable? Like
oh yeah.
So you just got to figure out, you're probably transferring more of that to your relationships than you realize. Those are probably old patterns or old feelings about patterns or something, because it is important when you're raising a child to not dump that shit on them.
Yeah, I don't feel like that with her. I feel it more with like my husband, even like my dog. You know, we always joke, my therapist and I, that the dog really was like my first thing that taught me how to love, because when I first had her, I kept being like, I can just like give her away, or I can, you know, like she's just being bad. I don't need to, and we had a lot of dogs growing up. So there was a lot of talk about like a traumatic thing that I think I was. And now I've had her for 9 years, and it's like a sad cliche joke, but that dog really taught me how to love something consistently. And it's just,
I think you're way better than you think.
Do you get spot checks and stuff still, or, you know, like spot checks, like go back to a therapist? Or
I did. So my therapist was very good, and she actually became a psychoanalyst. And my fantasy is I forced her into that. Of course, her boundaries were so good. She never told me any of this, but I was like, because I kept going more, deeper, more. I want to go more. And I went back a couple of times and did psychoanalysis with her. And I was like, it was all very accessible for me, especially with her at the helm, because we already had this thing. I'd go into almost a trance with her when I'd go on the road. It was so deep. And I haven't done that in a while. I feel like I could benefit from it possibly, but just haven't done it. It's like,
yeah, I think now, being in the space that you're in, do you find how do you feel? How do you feel right now? Yeah.
Feel a little physically uncomfortable. I got to pee. That's where I got to start. I'm hungry. I've been tired for today for reasons I can't explain. I'm leaving town tomorrow. I'm a little anxious about that. And my dog vomited before this podcast, and that makes me worry that I'm leaving him behind.
Oh.
Sort of when he may be sick, I'm not sure, but I really do want to go to New York City, and I've got a lot of people I want to see there and share and spend time with. So I'm feeling ultimately kind of positive and excited.
Good. Well, I also think we'll wrap it up, because it seems like you've got a lot.
Yeah, I do have much stuff going on, but but I think what we just did, me going through that, it's a good example of how our brains and our feelings work. It's not always just what's right here in front of us. You have to sit and you have to think about it, and you have to think about it with another person. This is what people miss. Like, if you had not been here, I wouldn't have gone down all the way down that path. I would have made it about 2 steps, and I would have been distracted by something else, and I wouldn't have been connected to it. Something about the thing we call a relationship that two bodies create together. And I would predict that if we were in the same room, it would be even more powerful for me. Something about two brains together create this third thing we call a relationship, within which you can experience yourself in ways that you just cannot. Your brain won't let you by yourself. And people got to understand that. Doesn't have to be a therapist. It can be a friend. Bridget, you're my friend now, and so this was our friend. I felt safe, but you got to believe the other person is listening, cares, feels your feelings, and you can be safe in it. And you can experience a lot of stuff in that kind of setting.
It's so true. It's so true, because it is that idea of self-knowledge avails us nothing. I can understand a lot of things about myself, but it does not do me any good to get out of my own way. I need help.
Sit with the sponsor and talk about your shit.
Yep.
You will talk about it in a way and go to a depth that humbly, I believe, your brain will not allow you on your own. It just doesn't allow you for some reason. There's an interpersonal neurobiology. There's actually experts in that field now. And actually a field of psychoanalysis has grown out of it. It's called, interpersonal psychoanalysis. And it's where, in my opinion, it's where I experience spirituality, is in the space between people. I know everyone has their own sort of sense of spirituality, but that's mine. And I've seen some really powerful stuff in settings of sharing with other people.
I love that. Well, I'll ask you the same two questions I ask everyone when I wrap up. What's your biggest defect of character? You can interpret that however you want. It can be today, your lifetime.
In my lifetime, I tend to exaggerate I used to exaggerate to the point of almost lying a lot of my life. And
hyperbole.
I think that's the trauma stuff. Yeah, verbal, like not stories, but I just wouldn't. My wife pointed out to me a couple of times. I'm like, I'm doing that. It's true. I didn't have 7 cups of coffee. I had 2 cups of coffee. Why did I say 7? I'm not even sure. And my mother used to do that too, which is interesting. So I wonder where that comes from. But I now conduct my life with the Kantian imperative. Always behave as though your choices and your behavior could be a moral imperative. A simpler way of saying it is, behave as though some of cameras on you all the time. And somebody could look at what your behavior and say, okay, made good choices.
Interesting. I love that.
So that got rid of some of that stupid exaggeration and stuff too.
That's really interesting.
But you have to work. It's a practice. Aristotle pointed that out. These sort of things of character, they don't happen automatically. You have to practice them.
That's that whole thing that saved me in sobriety. If you want self-esteem, do esteemable acts. It was so simple, and it was like mind blown.
Yeah, it's the action and the experiences that are really what's important.
And what's your biggest asset?
Got a pretty good brain. And it's an interesting brain. It's not just intellectual. I kind of have a instinctive quality. So I have judgment and ability to experience other people more holistically. I noticed my dad, again, had the same kind of thing. He had amazing judgment in medicine and stuff. And I've been blessed with a similar kind of judgment thing. So yeah, that ability to have experience things intuitively and intellectually, so in such a way that I can judge things properly. Well,
where can we find you, or where do you want to promote?
So I want you to go listen to me and Bridget when I'm driving the ship over the Dr. Drew podcast. So we had another different and interesting conversation there. And don't forget After Dark with Your Mom's House. And I do a streaming show. My wife would kill me if I didn't mention this. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 3:00 Pacific time, where essentially what I'm doing, at its core, I'm interviewing people that have been silenced. As soon as somebody gets silenced, I go, I want to talk to that person. Like just today, I talked to a guy named Simon at Adepa or something. He's a journalist that got silenced at the White House for asking good questions. I went, I want to talk to that guy. He's an African journalist. He's a very humble, brilliant dude. And he asked questions that counter the narrative and was kicked out of the press corps.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I have to listen to that.
I want to talk to him. I want to hear what he's thinking. I want to hear what it's just my instinct right now is there's so much crazy censorship of opinions. As soon as they're censored, I want to hear them. I don't know if I agree with them or not, but I just want to hear them. That's drdrew.tv. You can see all that stuff. So
thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Been fun.
Let me know when you're in Austin.
I'll be there a couple of months. I will.
It's time for the weekly check-in with Bridget and Cousin Maggie. So, Maggie, how was your brunch?
Is this an ambush?
Let's talk about you this week.
Yes, I went out to brunch with like 10 other women. I got invited with this girl that we met through your aunt, and she and I have become friends. And then she is making a group of friends, and so I got invited to this brunch of a bunch of other women. It was fun.
And what were the women like? I'm just so like, you get to be my single person out in the world in Austin.
It's interesting. You know, they're all like in their 30s, and a bunch of them had moved, or a bunch of them are recent transplants. So one of them had just moved here a couple months ago. Several of them were only about a year in. There were a couple of them who'd been here like 10 years longer, but mostly they seemed like within the last few years. And a bunch of them, which I found interesting and seems to be common with women in their 30s, apparently I've run into it a lot moving to Austin, is they had like a nomad year during COVID.
Yeah, one of the women who's in our Sarah Connor did that.
Right. But I didn't realize how kind of widespread it was, because a lot, like 3, or including the friend that I went knowing, 4 of them had done these kind of nomad wandering, like doing Airbnbs in different cities, and kind of just like
for like a month at a time,
bopping around the country. While I think because when everyone went remote, they were like, I'm going to get out of town and just keep working. And I just found that so interesting. It never occurred to me to do that. And so a lot of them kind of wound up in Austin because they just really liked it here.
Yeah.
Several of them were from New York, had been in New York City.
That's interesting.
Which I thought was interesting. And yeah, they just, you know, talking to some of them, they were talking about dating, and they were like, oh yeah, like the dating pool here is much smaller than in New York. And I was like, okay, yeah, I can see how that would be true. Cause one of them was like, you know, in New York, you'd see someone and like, then just like never see them again, whatever. And she's like, my friend and I have a system where, you know, since we're both on the apps, if we're going on a third date, we text each other and like let each other know like who the guy is, just so that we're like not crossing paths by accident by like dating the same guy or whatever. She was like, first, second dates don't really matter. Third dates is when if you care enough to see someone for a third date, that's when you want to kind of be like, I'm seeing this person.
That's so weird. I never even thought about that.
I know.
Yeah, and it is a small town. Yeah. For sure.
It's much smaller than New York or LA.
Oh God, yeah. By like 13 times.
Millions. Yeah. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting.
Do you think that are most of these people, do they care if it's like, I guess in your 30s, are you still looking for someone who's never been married? Does it matter? Is it like, are you looking for the divorced pool? Like, is this like round 2?
I mean, we didn't really cover that. It seemed like they were all they had never been married. None of them had ever been married. And I think they were probably looking for around the same thing. I think that's more common these days, maybe.
Right. Because men have also not been married into their 30s.
You know, now I'm in my 40s. I'm like, I'm so going to wind up with a divorced dude. It's like, it's also just like, you're like, if he hasn't been married by the time he's in his 40s, what's wrong with him?
Isn't it funny that that's like a judgment we have about men, but we don't hold that standard to women?
I know, and I've thought about that for sure. And I'm like, well, someone could easily apply that to me and be like, why haven't you been married in you're in your 40s? That's weird.
Yeah.
But I just haven't met the right person. So
yeah.
I mean, that's probably true of men who haven't been married in their 40s, but
yeah, Jaron was single in his 40s, but he had also been married.
Yeah, you'd both already been married. And I feel like you both got out of your marriages with kind of relatively minor scars. You know, no kids, no huge baggage.
Yeah.
Which is probably unusual.
Yeah, probably in my instance, because we were so young.
Yeah.
And I didn't get pregnant. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have any children, or we were poor, so we didn't have any property. Mm-hmm. I think that, yeah, it was like the easiest divorce in the world.
Right. But neither one of you, like and I don't know too much about Jaren's previous marriage, but just even listening to you guys through factory settings, it doesn't seem like he was severely emotionally scarred or anything by his divorce.
No, he kind of felt like he had to get married from what he's said.
Right.
You know, he's been open about this. He just thought it was what he was supposed to do.
Right. Right.
So, and I think that there's also, for as many men in their 40s who might not have met their person and gotten married, there's a lot of men who married somebody that they felt like they had to marry, but
just
maybe
because that was one of the steps of life. I know, I get that, because there are certainly, like, I dated one or two people that I could have been like, I could make this work and potentially be like, yeah, let's get married, let's whatever. But I just didn't want to. Like, they weren't the right person. But if I had that, like, oh no, I need to get married in my head, particularly like it's a box I have to check, then it's certainly, I could have seen that happening.
Yeah, and I don't think you were necessarily on the women's side. I don't think you were necessarily driven by a desire to have children. So on the same side that men might do that because they feel like it's the right thing to do or what they have to do, or for women, there's the biological imperative that drives them, and they'll often end up with men that you're like, really?
Yeah, the
but
ticking
they just
clock.
want kids.
Yeah, which I totally get.
Yeah.
I didn't have that, like, desire to, you know, have a baby.
Settle.
Yeah.
Well, no, you don't settle, but some women I know have settled because they wanted to have a baby, and they're either completely unaware of it or they're completely aware of it.
Right.
Either way, they don't care.
All known women who have settled. And I'm sure many men have settled too. You know, it's something that.
God, I remember, like, I've been thinking a lot about when I was doing that piece, Single Men of Ashley Madison.
Oh, yeah. God.
That piece was dark, but I was thinking about how many men in, like, loveless, attractionless, obviously it's like what they're reporting, so I can only take their word for it, but it just seemed like so many people were in, and there were women on there, just not nearly as many as there were men.
Right.
Just how many men in that were just in these relationships where there was no, I don't know. Affection. Yeah.
I know.
That's the word.
It really makes me so sad to think of how many people out there are trapped in unhappy relationships.
Because I look at, like, your parents, for instance, and they're just like teenagers still.
And I mean, they have certainly had their rough patches and, like, gone through their shit for sure. And they've worked on being like that. But yes, they are still happy together. Yes, they like enjoy each other's company. Yeah,
and I look at my aunt and uncle who are like my parents, and they're, yes, they drive can they finish each other's sentences? Do they drive each other crazy?
Yes.
Are there things like after 35, 40 years of marriage that you are like nails on a chalkboard?
Right.
But they're still, I can't imagine one without the other. And I think that's the case for them too.
Yeah.
They are a pair.
Right.
And
that's just,
they're still very much in love.
That's what we all want and hope for, and, like, to find your person. And
I mean, not everybody, but I think most
people. And so that really is really sad to think of people who just are staying in kind of mediocre, unhappy relationships for the kids for however many reasons. And there are a lot of reasons out there.
Yeah, fine. I mean, and I don't begrudge anyone for making that decision.
No, not at all
either, because I think staying in a marriage, if it's not, like, toxic,
right,
and you're still in love in many cases.
Well, not even in love, but there's love there.
There's love there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the guys who are like, my wife won't touch. There's no physical chemistry. I'm like, what are you supposed to do in that instance?
That's just really sad.
What do you do?
I don't know. I've never had to deal with that because I've never been married.
Marriage is hard.
Yeah.
But so is life.
Yeah. I mean, I'm constantly, definitely, like, I do want to meet someone, you know, but I'd rather be alone than in a kind of meh relationship that I'm not super excited about.
Interesting.
You know, because I know I can be alone. Like I'm perfectly happy doing that. I think I'd be more unhappy in a kind of like moderate
well, and at this point it's like you've held
like,
out this
why yeah
like,
but then I'm faced with the question of like, will I ever find someone? You know, like you
have to have faith.
You have to have faith, but it's, you know,
I've been watching all the old fairy tales, like Disney fairy tales with my daughter, the child, because the new ones don't really don't capture her. Maybe yet, maybe they will, but something about the graphic, it just doesn't draw her attention the way the old animations do.
Right. The Pixar ones don't really draw her the way the like old drawn cartoons do.
Yeah. So I've just been watching them because the only time she can relax in the afternoon since she's just abandoned her second nap like a boss. Like her mother. And I was like, am I putting these like false ideals in my daughter's head of because I grew up with all that fairy tale crap.
Yeah.
And do you set yourself up for these false?
I mean,
but I got it.
Yeah, exactly. Like some people get it. Some people get their fairy tale.
I mean, it's not easy. They don't show you like the part after, but I definitely had the electric shock and the chemistry. And then we ended up breaking up and getting back together. And it's not the straight path story. But
I know several couples that have like the fairy tale.
Yeah.
That are still happily together after many, many years.
And kids.
I don't think it's impossible. It's also, I think these days, certainly like a doorway to like those conversations with her as she gets older, like having those discussions with her. I mean, like, what do you think about this? Or what do you blah, blah, blah. I know.
She's in an arranged marriage.
That's right. She's got already like 2 potential suitors online. So
I've already arranged her marriage to Mike Jones's child.
Bridget's just going old school on this one.
Look, you need to survive, kid. All right. And you're going to, who's going to keep you alive? Mike Jones's son.
Oh, boy. What if she's a lesbian, Bridget? What if she's gay?
Maybe.
Then you'll have to come up with a different suitor for her. A different arrangement for her.
I'm not getting that vibe from her.
You're like, I think I'd be able to tell.
Aren't you born with it? Isn't that the whole thing?
We can certainly tell with one of our cousins. But I don't know. It seems easier to spot amongst little boys when they're gay.
I don't know. I feel like lesbians are pretty easy to spot too.
It depends on the lesbian. There's some, like, I know a lot of lesbians from playing ice hockey growing up.
And shocking.
Some of them are very easy to spot. And then some of them you find out later and you're like, oh, I'm actually surprised by that.
Really?
Yeah.
They were like lipstick lesbians?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Well, I guess we'll see. I'm going to have to get some kind of baby on
You're going to have to get some order some gaydar online.
Some non-binary kid. Tune in next week for another riveting episode that will change your life, help you get out of your own way, and solve all the world's problems. I want to thank our composer, Jared Elias, my co-producer and cousin, Maggie, and all of you out there listening. This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.